probably here because of my work. I work as a researcher, a futurist at Sony Mobile. So the company that do these, which I'm sure that everyone has.
We used to be Sony Ericsson.
Used to be Sony Ericsson, used to be Ericsson Mobility. I worked at all those places. I worked in the mobile industry since 1998. It's a very exciting industry, and I'm gonna get back to exactly why. Alright, so that's what I'm here about, and I'm gonna talk about commercial transhumanism today. I didn't select the topic, Valdemar did, and I found it very interesting, and I thought, as a bit of a challenge to myself, let's see where I can go with this. Now, why are you here? I'm used to doing large-style presentations all over the world. This is where I brag, where I stand and have a PowerPoint slides, no text, no bullet points, pretty images supporting what I'm saying, and thousands of people listening. I can't do that here today, because what I usually talk about is getting people to accept that change happens. Change is quick, and change is disruptive. And you would all walk out of here if I started to do one of my regular presentations, because you all know that. Else you would not be here. So this is a different kind of presentation, a different kind of talk. I will often invite you to have opinions when I touch upon a specific topic. This will go a lot quicker if you don't have any opinions, so please have. Alright. I found this on Wikipedia. Humanity Plus is an international organization which advocates the ethical use of emerging technologies to enhance human capacities. Alright, so that's what we're about, enhancing human capacities. What is that? What's a human capacity? 8,000 years ago, in what's today the Sahara Desert, which was a lush savanna at the time, about 10 million people lived. You know, small congregations, they met up maybe every year or so, and they chatted and talked and lived their lives. Catastrophic climate change happened. So 3,000 years before the birth of our famous philosopher, all humans had to move to where there was water, the Nile Valley. Humans had to move closer together. There were about 25 million people on Earth by that time. And after a while, they invented language or pictograms. Instead of having to tell stories and tell people that, all right, here's all the knowledge that I have, you can actually tell people, oh, don't ask me that again, go read it up on the stove. Which was an enormous invention. It meant that humans could carry more information from one generation to another. Now, we can fast forward, and we could get to something like the Gutenberg printing press. We can talk about the Library of Alexandria. We can talk about the invention of newspapers and telegraph. All these technologies meant that more humans could communicate much quicker. And at the same time, the number of humans increased. There were about 120 million people on Earth when we had the Library of Alexandria. About 450 million people on Earth when Gutenberg invented the printing press, or rather, the Chinese invented the printing press, but he used metal typefaces. 1930, we got the telephone. About 2.1 billion people on Earth. And this meant that you can actually contact someone without just being a telegraph operator. You can call someone up, you can exchange ideas and whatever you had in mind. 2.8 billion people in 1955 will get the TV set, which is the biggest spreader of information and cultural know-how ever until a certain point in time after that, which also meant that wherever you go in the world it looks like a bad version of Hollywood. 1970, 3.7 billion people on Earth. Computers start talking via modems. You see in the movie War Games, that's the kind of modem we had in the 70s. And in 1995, the world changes. We get the internet for normal, regular consumer usage, as well as mobiles. And this frees up the whole globe to do communication. There are 5.7 billion people on Earth, and they're now connected. And a lot of people believe that we are still at that point in time, that we have the internet and that we have mobile phones. However, it's not true. In 2007 to 2010, the world moved to a different kind of device. We still call these mobile phones. They aren't. They are internet access points. They're a small, cheap device with a window to the internet, and this changed human behavior. 7 billion people on Earth when this happens. The story I just told, from 8,000 years ago up until now, is about connecting humans together, connecting human brains, with ever-increasing bandwidth from stones to books, telegraphs, newspapers, TV, photography, internet, with a lower and lower latency, from generations to weeks to days to now I'm instantly able to communicate all over the world in just a few thumb presses or taking a picture with my camera. This correlates extremely closely to the rate of innovation globally. It correlates closely enough for us to be able to say that human innovation is a function of increasing bandwidth and low latency between human brains. That's human capacity. So Humanity Plus is an organization that wants to have ethical use of increasing human capacity. And increasing human capacity throughout time has been about communication between human brains. We're doubling the amount of technical information available every 6 months at the moment. That's human capacity.
Every 6 months?
6 months. Alright, so I stopped in 2010 and I talked about the mobile internet devices, some called smartphones. So where do we go from there? I've done personal research, and my department does research on visors. So you've heard about Google Glass. They've been a consumer product for 4 years now, a similar product. It's all about when does someone come to the market with something that works. If you looked at the 2009 CES, you would see Tom Hanks wearing a few Sony AR visors and talking about how he could see stuff about the audience. I've used Google Glass. I hope others here have as well. It's a bit about sitting in a car and having a rear view mirror where you can get information on the world around you. Research is ongoing and currently tested on animals on the next device in this change. That's lenses, so augmented reality lenses is going to be the next device after the visors. This is not really controversial. If you work in the consumer electronics, this is alright, that's the roadmap. Controversial is the next thing, of course, which would be the brain implants appearing about 10 years after that. Mostly because humans have an issue with invasive technology. We'd like to have our technology external, not internal. What do we use this for? What do humans do when we communicate? You've probably heard about Twitter. A few years back there was a popular article that went around that said most of the things written on Twitter is crap. It's not useful communication. And then you have Tor Nørretranders, the Danish author of Notice the World, Matt Weldon, who wrote about X-formation. The things that it's an information. If you tell me something that's immediately useful, that's information. If you tell me stuff I don't know today what I will use for, or how it will affect me and what it says about you, that's X-formation, and it's equally useful. We use it for live streaming when playing games. If you've been to the site Twitch, you can see people who play games when they themselves are playing, and they broadcast that, and others sit and watch. That's a worthwhile use of human communication. It's built into the PlayStation 4. Everyone's going to be able to do it. Life logging is currently doing this. So I log my life and I broadcast it to others. This is what I eat, this is what I've been running today, this is where I drove with my car. Interesting use of communication. And Google Glass will go there. I'm currently visiting my child, I'm currently playing with him, and the family and relatives can see that. So human brains being connected is being used to submit not just information but X-formation. Things we don't know if others will make use of, but we'll broadcast and see if anyone's interested. It's likely this is going to continue when we go from visors to lenses to brain implants, and that we will start to broadcast emotions, thoughts, It's not really different. I have thoughts in my head at the moment, and I'm trying really, really hard to express those thoughts through the only medium I currently have at my disposal, which will make you receive the same thoughts. That is via my words, and hopefully we have the same background information, interpret the words in the same way, and you get the picture of what I'm thinking about. As soon as we can start communicate brain to brain, that will become a lot easier, because the brain, as someone just said before we started, the brain is very plastic. That's new knowledge that the consensus of science did not agree with up until a few decades ago. If you have a car, when you started driving a car, you were probably sitting very nervously in the car, looking around you, thinking about what am I going to do next, what's that car doing, and now it's time to brake and switch gear. And after a while, you don't think about it. It's because the brain is plastic. Driving a car and handling any tool, any vehicle, is for the brain the same as using an arm. We learn how to do it, and then it's automatic. That's the difference between being an inexperienced driver and being an experienced driver. I talked about humans and what we want to do, our capacity. This is all about consumer electronics. It's a boring existing business. Consumer electronics, this is again from Wikipedia, are electronic equipment intended for everyday use, most often in entertainment, communications, and office productivity. That describes pretty well what humans do with communication. We use it for entertainment, we use it for communications. So consumer electronics is the same business as all the innovation that is leading up to the cool transhumanist things like visors and lenses and brain implants. And this is converging. Businesses that traditionally have not been seen as consumer electronics, that is manufacturing or medical equipment in hospitals, is, because of development in 3D printing and quantified self, rapidly becoming consumerized. We buy these devices and track ourselves and manufacture things ourselves because it's cheaper, easier, more decentralized. So a lot of areas that haven't traditionally been thought of as consumer electronics is becoming consumer electronics. This is a decentralized disruption. I work as a futurist. A lot of futurists can be seen as trend analysts. You take a trend and you project it, and then you tell people, yes, all human beings on Earth will be on MySpace in 2011, and it turns out you're wrong because of disruption. You read Nassim Taleb's excellent Black Swan, that's what he was talking about. You can make a trend line, but for long until it doesn't hold. When does something happen that you cannot predict? 3D printing and quantified self is basically disrupting existing businesses that have traditional large foothold in large companies and governments. Startups are currently being run in this area. I was approached in a startup that had to do with actually analyzing blood a while back. How can we create that? How can we make that? How can we decentralize it? How can we make it possible for people to do? What kind of information can we extract? And wham! Ran into a wall of legal issues. It's currently one of the biggest problems facing a transhumanist startup is that you're at the forefront of an industry which has current legal ramifications. You're not allowed to do that. This is not uncommon. You probably heard of YouTube. YouTube for several years was pretty much considered illegal but not yet decided in court. Viacom was one of the companies that sued YouTube, and Google had to take that fight to the courts, and Google won, which wasn't at all obvious. A lot of other companies haven't won. Napster, Pirate Bay, etc. And today we got Spotify, which if the record companies hadn't invested in Spotify, there's no way Spotify would exist. We have Bitcoin. If anyone here is a Bitcoin user, where some countries say it's absolutely illegal, others say we don't have any opinion, and some say it's fully legal. Bitcoin being a complete decentralized currency and transfer of wealth. I can do an immediate transfer of basically any number of coins valued in real life anywhere on the globe, and no one but me and that person are involved. no one can stop it. It goes outside of all existing legal boundaries when it comes to currency. Decentralization. It's makes people nervous to say that we're going to decentralize things. A lot of people like decentralized society. There's a part of the government that regulates this kind of equipment which is being used for medical purposes. It sounds safe. The centralized society is pretty much an outlier in human history. The notion of you having your own personal life and then you go to some sort of centralized production capability, a factory, or you perform your function in a centralized part of society, is basic since the industrial society. That's probably the outlier. So going to a decentralized society is going back to what humans have been doing for thousands of years already. So if you've ever watched sci-fi, pretty much I'd say 80-90% of all sci-fi is pretty dystopic. Pictures a future where we're all cogs in the machine, the huge apparatus is controlling us, a very dark, bleak future. It seems like we're not going to end up there. It seems like a lot of things that are currently happening are decentralized. I think one of the more positive outlooks would be Star Trek, which is beginning to look like what we are seeing. The disruption of the work and private life, merging those into one. What is trying to come up? What does Spock do in his spare time? Well, he's Spock, even in his spare time. There are worries on the horizon when it comes to decentralization. If you follow the news, you've heard about the NSA surveillance of the internet. We can see Amazon, Facebook, Google building very centralized data centers. I used to run a mail server myself at home. That's very uncommon to do today. We run it on Gmail, or if you do something at home, you still run it on a virtual server in someone else's data center. That's centralization that is currently clashing with the decentralization that is happening. A lot of people are worried about that centralization and are working on it. We can see the Internet Strategic Forums are taking an active stance saying the centralization is very bad and we should do something about it. Because a lot of people realize that we are building Skynet. It's not a joke. We are building automated drones that can fire their weapons. We are building artificial intelligence. Whether it will ever get strong, we don't know. Maybe doesn't need to. Maybe it's totally emergent and we'll never notice when it actually becomes self-conscious. It will be able to make decisions. We're happily outsourcing ourselves. I have Google now on my mobile. It tells me when I want to see football. I basically never watch football unless it's Zlatan Ibrahimovic, then I watch. And my mobile tells that to me. I never ever tell it to let me know when Zlatan plays, whether it's in the Swedish national team or whether it's for his club in France. It knows. I know how it picked it up, but it knows. I never told it. That's a lot about humans. So what's the commercial aspect to transhumanism? Why would companies start to building the products that we here want to see? Well, it is about making a profit. Of course it is. You want to offer something that's attractive, that your competitors don't have and don't know that they should make. Your manufacturing method needs to be better. The time it takes to go from idea to production for anyone else should be long enough so that they don't have time to copy you. That's about the commercial aspect, and they don't care. Commercial company doesn't really care what they're building as long as it sells and you make money. That's the abstract of being a commercial entity. A few hundred years ago, if society wanted to build a cathedral, or a rich person wanted to build a castle, the time it took to get to a finished product from idea was on centuries, or at least generations. It took very, very long time where you could start to plan whatever you wanted to do, drive it through, create the environment you needed. We're not at all there today. I talked about how human communication has been on an exponential rise throughout the ages, and we're now today doubling the amount of technical information in every 6 months. The time you have available from idea until you create a product has been getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And today, it's small enough to be visible in a regular company's strategy. This change happened in the 90s, beginning of the 20th century. It's very new. Some industries and some companies still haven't seen it. You now have to plan for disruptive innovation and disruptive shifts in the market space and in the product space you're working with as a commercial entity. If you want to be successful, if you want to be able to build products and sell them, you have to think about what happens next. You're not able to rest on your laurels and just say that we are doing excellent products and we're going to keep doing excellent products in the same space. Patents are irrelevant today. I still work at a company that applies for patents. I have 13, I think, for that company. But patents aren't relevant. If you have an idea, you try to make it into a product and you try to capitalize on that product, and once you're done, that's basically when the patent gets approved. You're already done, you already have put it into a product. The patent never protects you when it comes to creating a product and selling it on the market. Now you can get into patent wars, and that's what we're seeing today. After the fact, after someone else did the same thing that you did, you can claim, I have a patent on that, let's fight for money. But it doesn't protect your innovation. It actually plays no role whatsoever in whether you're going to productize something or not. It takes too long to know if you get the patent, and others don't care. They copy your product as soon as you make it. So how to become this quick? How to be this quick to the market with your ideas and with our products? 75 to 90% of all startups backed by venture capitalists fail. 75 if you want to be nice and count the companies that basically make their investment back. 90% fail if you see it from the venture capitalist point of view. They want to make money. 9 out of 10 companies fail. So if I'm working at a company, I'm not a startup, I'm working at a company, I want to stay alive tomorrow, how many ideas do I need to make into products to be able to make money? Well, of course, 10 where 9 fails. That's an interesting future if you're working in a research department, because you have on the other side, you have accountants that tell you, will this make money? And you don't know. 9 out of 10 fails and you don't know which will succeed. And you have to plan for a future that does not exist. You have to be 3 years ahead to be able to get manufacturing up and running, get your products through the organization. And you don't know what the world will look like in 3 years. Gaming companies have been here for a while. When you create a video game today, you don't create it for the platforms that exist. You create it for the platforms that will exist when the game is finished. It's the same thing in any consumer electronic company today. So that's about research in a company. Will government-funded innovation save us? In Sweden we have Vinnova. In the European Union there have been the FP7 programs. And as I said, I'm on parental leave, so there's something that came after FP7. I actually don't know the name of it. I've been involved in both these, Vinnova and FP7. You get there, you start talking to them about your idea, what one do you want to research, and then they say, is there an interest in this in the market today? You better have an answer to that question. You might be looking at 3 years ahead. They will want to know that the idea has traction, that it will get, if they fund it, it will become a successful product. And the only way to answer that question is to say, yes, of course, there's a lot of interest in the marketplace for this thing that does not exist in a market that does not exist yet for 3 years. It's very difficult to get government funding to do actual research. You need to phrase it as products. One of the projects I was involved in had to do with palliative care, so care in your final days, trying to move that to the home environment where the person who's very ill is able to call up friends and family, and all the tests, all the blood work, etc. can be done in the home environment. You can have a virtual contact with the nurse in the hospital, etc. And again, huge regulation issues. So where's the commercial sector when it comes to transhumanism today? I'm here because I work at a CE company. I work on research in a CE company. I work in one of the few companies on earth that still does base research, where we figure out stuff that we don't know if it will have a commercial value. So is that special? I was a research manager at Nokia. I know they're not anywhere today, but they were a few years back. And he talked about brain implants. This was, I think, in 2004, 2005. A lot of people just went, what? How are you able to talk about brain implants? That you're scaring consumers away. Well, he was, but he talked about brain implants. And he was the head of research at Nokia. Fujitsu's the CTO, Chief Technology Officer, he's talking about brain implants at the moment. Sony has been talking about AR visors for a very long time. It's all about when can you make them cheaply enough and attractive enough to become a viable product. Google Glass is, on its way. You see research when it comes to augmented reality and lenses and regular magazines, life logging, the Runkeeper applications, measuring your sleep quality for a better life. These are all transhumanist topics. And they're very much out there. Regular startups, regular consumer electronic companies, you can see them in any newspaper and any magazine. It's actually not controversial. I think we sometimes want to see ourselves as being, at the very cutting leading edge. But these topics have, for the last decade, become commonplace because companies are constantly getting disrupted at the moment. You're not able to say, no, I don't believe that will happen, because they've been burnt many, many, many times. And I just mentioned one of the companies that was burnt because they did not understand how quickly a disruptive shift happens. I thought I was being on the cutting edge a few years ago. As I said, at my department we do research on augmented reality visors. And one of the issues, of course, with an augmented reality visor is how are you going to control the UI? You want to walk around with a keyboard? Google Glass is a touch screen. I go here and scratch the side of my head all the time. So I thought, well, it's sitting here. We can probably pick up the difference in brain activity here and here. So I could maybe be able to answer stuff, yes and no type questions by focusing my thoughts. And I brought this up in a meeting, and I was sitting there, and I almost bracing myself for the storm that would happen. And everyone looked at me, nodded their heads, and went, all right. Have you looked into what type of activity happens in those places, and what kind of training we would need to pick that up? I was basically thrown away, because I thought this was going to be met with resistance. It wasn't. Picking up brain activity was seen as, that's a natural evolution of being able to control a visor UI. That basically changed some of my thinking when it came to colleagues, how prepared they were to start talking about difficult subjects. So, what do we do in a research department today? Do we look into material research? Is this glass? How do we protect the glass? How can you make a better camera? A lot of the research is actually into human behavior. So when we do visor research or quantified self-research, it's very much psychology involved. We have we do research projects together with universities, where it's often the interaction between human and machine that's the topic. We kind of know we can do the technology, but just doing the technology isn't enough. It needs to be suitable for humans. It needs to be something that humans want to work with, and it has to feel natural. That's difficult, feeling natural. In 1999 to 2001, I worked on a product that was released in 2002, which was known as the Sony Ericsson P800. It was a mobile device with a full touch screen, web browsing, and apps. In 2002. It didn't become a huge success like the iPhone, and we can sit here and debate forever why, but there is a tantalizing piece of research that goes into what the difference was. The P800 had a resistive touch screen. You pressed it, You had buttons you pressed, and you had to physically press them. The iPhone had a capacitive touch with a very natural flowing motion. You just flicked to scroll and it kept scrolling. Apple had done the research on how to make things behave as if they're natural, as if they interact with humans. And we hadn't, I'll happily admit, at Sony Ericsson at the time. We thought we were just doing a touch interface to the existing UI. The closeness of technology is an active area of research. I have a colleague who made a presentation at an AR summit called Through the Keyhole, where we talk about using technology today, a computer through a keyboard or a regular mobile phone that had a keyboard, etc. You kind of had this whole technological world, and you used it through a very narrow interface, the keyhole. And what is happening at the moment in consumer electronics with AR visors, etc., is that we are moving the keyhole closer and closer and closer and making it immersive, so that we are feeling that we are doing natural actions when we communicate with others. This is very close to the transhumanist notion of building the technology into humans. Maybe we don't need it under the skin, but it needs to be felt like a part of us. And this is what people are seeing their mobile as. There's research, and sorry, the latest numbers I had myself were from 2009. I know they're very different at the moment. Losing your mobile is seen as a personal loss that can induce depression by 35% of users. In 2009, I think that number is up to above 60% today, but I didn't have a source. It's not even seen as technology any longer. You've probably heard about seeing newspapers talk about how you're addicted to internet and addicted to gaming and addicted to role-playing and addicted to. And yes, there are some about being addicted to your mobile, but it's not controversial because everyone understands that it's very important. It's a device that everyone uses. Addicted? Well, it's part of our lives and we use it to live those lives. So innovation is chaotic. 9 out of 10 venture capital-based startups fail. So how do you know that you can innovate a product and create something that everyone wants? Well, you involve the swarm. You involve your users. You involve a lot of people who's not working at your company. In open source, you share the source and a lot of people work with it. Open innovation, companies band together to do research projects. Manufacturing, you all go to the same places to manufacture. You share knowledge, like in the early Silicon Valley with all the companies' employees that went to the same bar and talked. And that's happening more and more on purpose by companies today. It's very difficult to innovate in a world where you don't know if the next startup will win over you. The innovator's dilemma. If you're an incumbent company, how are you able to stay ahead of the competition? If you need to innovate 10 times as much as anyone else, it's too expensive. So the whole notion of openness, involving the swarm, doing things with open source and open tools and open hardware, is about cost. This is it's kind of a brain teaser. Companies aren't doing this to be nice. Well, we like to be nice as well. But we're doing it because of cost. It's too expensive to innovate in today's marketplace if you need to pay everyone the full salary. And we don't know what we will innovate. Sweden is way ahead, at least almost globally, when it comes to open APIs. We have a lot of data, we open it up, and we don't know why. We don't know what will be produced with all this data, but others will. It's a very common thing today. Others will know, others will research, others will make. There are 700,000 applications in both the big app stores. Others will make something good. I don't need to. There's a maturity scale when it comes to open source. It has 5 levels. Basically, the first level of being involved in open source is, yes, someone else has done something, now I'm going to take it and use it for my product so I don't have to do any coding. Level 5 is, I do everything open. We don't produce a single line of code in-house. we immediately push it to others, because the feedback that we will get when we work with them will lessen the amount of bugs and will increase our own rate of development, etc. And the whole society is moving towards that kind of openness in product development. Apple as well, they are using an open source kernel, etc. Otherwise Apple is, not that known for being open. Too expensive to do all the innovation ourselves. Eric von Hippel, who's been studying where innovation comes from for many, many years, estimates that 70% of all product innovation for a consumer electronics company today is done by its users. 70% of all innovation that ends up in future products is being done by users. Seems like a research department would be a waste of people and time and money. And maybe it is. What will society look like when we're not able to pay people to innovate? If all the users are involved, and open source and open development is the norm, and people are doing that just by being alive, just by being citizens, and companies aren't able to pay a full salary for all the researchers, you can't do that. You can't pay 10 times the amount you get back for a product. Well, I think we're seeing the end of the industrial societies working 8 to 4. Having a job and then going back and having a personal life. It's likely we'll do a lot of things throughout the day. Some of the things will get paid for, some not. And there's a movement today when it comes to citizen salary, medborgare in Swedish. If everyone is involved in creating stuff, then maybe we should just pay everyone. Because we don't know who will innovate the next huge product, and we don't know where the next user involvement in product development comes from. There's a quote from a very famous design company known as Frog Design that I like. The traditional model of managerial resource allocation and coordination, mainly coerced through extrinsic motivation in the form of rewards and punishments, such as payments, promotions, demotions, etc., has become outdated and no longer reflects the social fabric of today's workforce. When we want to hire people, we can't compete on salaries. We pay good salaries, but that's not what people are looking for. Can I bring my own computer? Can I use a Mac? Are you PC only? I'm not going to work for you. A lot of people today are having very, very different requirements for their life, where work is just one part, compared to the traditional industrial society where it just said, you get a job, you get paid, now you work. Valdemar used a word for today's topic where he mentioned nördbaroner.
Kära publik, hjärtligt välkomna till Kulturhuset, Stadsteaterns friscen och dagens föreställning Carmen kring blå. Ni är strax välkomna in i salongen. Vi vill därför be er att vänligen stänga av era telefoner samt påminna om att fotografering ej är tillåtet under föreställningen.
So, the nerds that make an imprint in society, Elon Musk made the Tesla is one of the examples. You could say Google's founders is another example. Peter Thiel founded PayPal is another example. What will they do? Why do we talk about them and what they create? It's likely because they are people with control over enormous amounts of money without being stuck in an existing paradigm. They got the money without having to walk through this very narrow path that traditionally gave you a lot of power. Now they have a lot of power, but are still kind of reflecting on their own thoughts and what they want to do, and it's common that they want to change the world. Transhumanists see a different world, and these people want to change the world. And where there's likely a new breed appearing, if this holds, as I talked about Bitcoin, which I don't recommend investing in. I always mention I do not recommend anyone investing in anything just because I talk about it. If I'd follow my own advice, I'd be rich. Bitcoin has increased in value from nothing to a lot. And people I know and others whom I don't know are currently very, very wealthy, measured in Bitcoin value, which they can exchange for other currencies. We are likely, if this continues, seeing the rise of a new breed of people who have enormous amounts of money, and they haven't been through this very narrow path, and they will invest in changing the world. What do humans do? What do we like to do, and why do we like to do it? Two things that govern us as a species. We want to explore, and we want to achieve. That's, by the way, why Minecraft became such a popular game. You explore and you achieve. And these are the people, when they do stuff, who want to break new ground, put a hotel on Mars, or create a company that flies into space, or change the paradigm of human commerce. And they want to make an achievement, as long as they have this ability and have this money. Politics. I told you I was active in politics as well. You can easily think that politics is about setting a vision for society and working towards that goal. Unfortunately, that's not what politics looks like. Politics is, as quarterly thinking, just as in many companies. What's the next result? When's the next election? What's our popularity figures in the press? Very little of long-term vision of society. And as I said about government funding, it's very difficult to sell the future in politics. You need to talk about how things will change today if you want to get traction with politicians. And so we end up with, I think, what's going to be the result of today's talk. The brand Transhumanism. If I mention another brand, ecological, I'm going to claim it's truest good. I have difficulties arguing against, I can do it on facts, but I have difficulty arguing against the brand ecological. It sounds as something that is truest good. Sustainable, one of the hottest topics if you're working in companies today. Sustainable is another form of truest good. I can't argue against it. I want to be unsustainable. It's very difficult to bring up in a conversation. Those are very, very good brands. If I work in sustainability, I'm a good person. If I work in ecological development, I'm a good person. If anyone can argue against these, please speak up. Genetically modified organisms. Do you want to speak for them or against them?
Partially for them. There's, I think at least, enough reason to find them useful for humanity, to not shun them entirely as the ecological brand has, which is problematic, which is why I am conservative, maybe, to buy the ecological brand as the truest good.
So knowing the facts, I think more than a few people here know that GMO seems to be good, and that ecological sometimes isn't all good because of the actual product being. Technical development has done a lot of good when it comes to growing crops, and if you go ecological, you might lose some of them. But that's still basic. Talking about the facts, it's very difficult to find someone who in a store will say that ecological is bad and GMO is good. It's a branding issue. I agree with you on the facts.
Okay, then perhaps I misunderstood your question.
GMO has a problem with branding. That's true. It's very much true. We'll probably see it change, and I think the example of golden rice is one of the forerunners in that area. How do we want to brand transhumanism? Technology in humanity's service. The purpose of technological development is to further humans. This is true. As I said in the beginning, that's what we've been doing for 8,000 years. Human-friendly technology. a cross-discipline that involves understanding when it comes to humans and futuristic projections. If you're an environmental consultant, companies will hire you. Same for sustainability. Can we be transhumanist consultants that companies will bring in to make sure that their product thinking, their product development is in line with human development? I do believe so. I believe that's where transhumanism can go. It's a very natural movement. And then it's a branding issue. How do you make sure that that's the brand that people will talk about, instead of just talking about transhumanism as being weird persons who have sex with robots or something, which, you know, has happened. There's an attraction in transhumanists talking about 3D printing and quantified self, because it also means, and now I'm coming back to the buzzwords that are so important to talk about in today's society. We can't sell the future. There's an attraction in talking about 3D printing as a means of getting manufacturing back. We've been outsourcing manufacturing to huge centralized production plants for a few decades. It's now changing, and it's rapidly changing as well. Startups are able to produce stuff in someone's garage and sell, thanks to 3D printing revolution. There's an attraction in talking about how technology working for technology should mean that humans get more time for creativity. This, you know, bubbling world of innovation, where we don't really know how humans do product development and then be part of it, but we just need to know that it needs time. So a 6-hour workday or a 4-hour workday or a 3-day work week, etc., where technology does the work. One of the reasons that we are seeing unemployment is because we're actually doing stuff too well. We don't need as many people working. And until we realize that, we will have unemployment. I talked about mobile addiction. It's the first time that I'm seeing negative talk about a technology that people just look at and say, nah, it's not negative. When I was 12, I started programming, and I was told by my parents to be outside and play more. And I told them, I'm going to make money on this in the future. I didn't know. I was right, but I didn't know at the time. Today, my 15-month-old kid has his own mobile. And it's not negative, and it's not seen as negative, that he learns to navigate a touch interface at the age of 15 months. Oh yes, that's the future. Even his grandma and grandpa think so. Specific technologies in the marketplace that we should brand transhumanist. Again, coming back to what I talked about, technology working for humans and in the service of humans and furthering humans. And these I actually went through our Facebook group and I picked up. Transcranial stimulation to increase learning, be quicker at gaming. It's actively being used. I can talk about this at work and people will only look slightly weird. Bone conducting microphones already exist on product. Google Glass bone conducting microphone. We are talking about throat muscle activated microphones, which would pick up what I was just said without me having said it out loud. Interesting. I want all my co-passengers to have that on the train. Body temperature regulation. Fooling the body into changing the body temperature. Printing of prostheses and body parts. It just happens. No talking about it. I have a dental thing that I use at night, else I get migraines. It cost several thousands just a few years back. I can get them dirt cheap now. It's very, very easy to make. Products that tell us when we should do stuff. This is one of the dangerous parts where we're outsourcing ourselves. Google now telling me stuff that I actually never asked you for. Google Glass is going even further in that way. We had an idea, a prototype on a device that measured my sleep quality and checked what the traffic situation was like, so that it could wake me in time, dependent on the traffic situation, for me to meet my next meeting. and I just didn't care. It just woke me up at the right time, and I didn't have to think about it. And so the challenges. What are the major challenges to this kind of technological development, which is not seen as controversial, where I think we can have an interesting brand that consumer electronics companies will accept and like? Energy. These are the things you want to solve. Energy. How do I charge my augmented reality lens? Difficult. But it's not controversial to talk about using the body, using our biological body as the energy source. I thought that would be more controversial. It isn't. It's the battery we always carry with ourselves, and let's try to avoid the matrix association. Wearability. We tried to do products at Sony Mobile where the consumer had to walk away with, a mobile and another device and a third device, and it turns out that it doesn't happen. There's a very strong resistance from carrying one device to carrying two. So if we want to create more devices that interact with humans and other humans and the internet, etc., they need to either be one or they need to be worn without having to be carried, having to be taken off and put on. And then the biggest threat of them all, intellectual property. The legal framework always protects what exists. It never protects what it does not know about. A lot of startup ideas in the transhumanist area are either outright illegal or in a legal gray area. So when you think about whether to invest time or money in something, that's a huge problem. And one of the solutions is likely to not care. And the other longer solution is to do political groundwork. And let's leave it at that. My final two topics. What's going to be the transhumanist breakthrough? And I'm putting that into context. The environmental organization, Swedish Miljöpartiet, had a huge number of dead seals as their breakthrough moment. Säldöden in Swedish. It actually hadn't all that much to do with the environment, but getting the headlines meant that they had a breakthrough, got into parliament, and then the Green Revolution happened in Sweden and in other places. The laws around the illegal surveillance of the internet and the Snowden revelations of NSA had their movement in the Pirate Party movement, breakthrough in 2008, where that movement started spreading. Those two movements are the latest movements in the world that has actually captured a lot of attention of a lot of people. So what's going to be the transhumanist breakthrough? And I don't have an answer to that. It's a topic for further speculation here today. Try to avoid, planting false flag operations and biological outbreaks of the latest virus we put together at home or something. But I think it's a very important question to answer. What's the transhumanist breakthrough, and what should the brand look like? Because that is the intersection of commercializing transhumanism. And that's what I had to talk about today. Thank you.
So, 10 different scenarios to have one that actually is closing, right?
Sorry, again.
So we should ideally come up with 10 different scenarios to have one that works, right?
Thank you. I managed to make that point clear. I noticed.
Troed, thank you very much for this inspiring speech. And it's interesting to hear you talk about this because, from what I gather, there are some similarities in this entrepreneurial, in a wider degree, that environment you have described with transhumanism. If I look backwards in the history of transhumanism, you could see that it emerged from an academic environment in the New School in New York. You could see that it branched out to counterculture, to parts of the art scenes in California, but it has had difficulties reaching into two environments, namely politics, because it doesn't have incentive to innovate, and especially not innovate disruptively. That is why we have still the same parties that we had about 100 years ago in Europe. And another problem has been reaching into the business environment, because it's difficult to make a connection between technology that was the focus of an industry that produced more of the same and societal disruption. So we're seeing this coming together. What is the last bridge? Is it to be able to sell vision, or to be able to make a good business plan, or getting people from the business side to come to these meetings? What do you see as that final connection?
When it comes to the consumer electronics companies, I think the point is made. Either you are aware of disruptive innovation and try to find it yourself, or you're dead in the marketplace. Well, that's been the result of the last 10 years, I'd say. A lot of companies have realized that we cannot continue doing more of the same. So they're out there, and if you go to any large company and talk to their research department, technical department, you'll find people who, like me, start talking readily about brain implants and stuff. It's not a problem at all. I'd say the problems are regulatory. We can talk about the ideas, we can talk about innovation, but as soon as you try to go to the product department and say, let's do this, yes, it's illegal, but let's do this, you'll get into trouble, and that won't become a product. Very few companies will go out and produce something that's not legal. I think that's the largest problem at the moment. You can always trust a startup to do it, like Spotify. Either they fail or they don't, but a large existing company will not go there. And that's a huge problem when it comes to innovation. But I'm not worried when it comes to consumer electronics and transhumanist topics. It's a very much do or die situation in that marketplace. When it comes to changing society's views and existing laws and politicians, that's much more difficult, because I don't see it possible, as I said, to sell the future. You need to bring up how it will benefit you today. And I think that's one of the things that rests on us to do now. How will transhumanism better today and not just the future?
I think it's a very interesting topic. Thanks for putting all this up on the table, Troed. And I think it's very much for further discussion inside our group. What do we want to really achieve and work towards as transhumanists? And I'm sure there are as many answers as there are people around the table, but I'll happily throw out a couple of ideas myself to start this discussion. And for me, what I'm after is just, I want to, as an individual and for everyone who wants, have the maximum capacity to do as much fun things as I want with the help of technology. So I welcome all the consumer electronic companies that develop cool devices that can allow me to walk around town with a little visor that will give me the name and possible single or dating status of every girl I see when I walk down the street. That will be a kick-ass product. As well as the biotech or drugs companies that will develop new products that will make us improve our memories, improve our intelligence, improve our endurance in sports and all these things. That's, I mean, in a way, the only thing we can do, or no, not the only thing, but one important thing we can do as an organization is just to cheer and welcome these developments. Of course, what companies ultimately care about is people buying the products, not just a few cheerleaders shouting, jubilating over the products. But I think that may be a merit to that as well, especially when we want to make things happen, as you point out, that are still a bit far from what the consumer knows that they are interested in. So So it's a fantastic idea to sum up that this which you brought up to, in one way, engage with companies who, for example, are developing products for the future, and let's infiltrate the test groups and say that this is what we want. You know, we like to work underground sometimes. So this is not radical enough. We want something more crazy and da da da. And possibly in that way, that would be one way we could affect these things. A couple of ideas.
I'm thinking about the branding and perhaps the word enhance or enhances, like the ecological and then the enhancing, sort of, because I think that's something that's rather relatable. And I think as for the thing that could perhaps like change the be sort of a breakthrough, a milestone, could be something like the microphone you're talking about, because I think in an everyday situation where people like the subway, I think that's a wonderful example, because I think everyone can relate to how wonderful it would be that I communicate and only you can hear me and I don't have to hear anyone else. And I think that kind of very small implant that doesn't feel so radical, as soon as we have something that's inside the body, I think that's the breakthrough. We just have to get something small inside everyone's body.
We should volunteer to drive that movement. Put our bodies in front of the cameras.
The avant-garde who gets killed.
In front of the machine gun.
People that they use for like monitor health. So
It's beginning.
yeah.
Well, how about
Sorry.
No, you were first.
like you mentioned that big companies, they have to take that into account and get the power to promote consumers and learn from them. And Spotify was one of the examples that they did that. They kept the beta testing for more than they had anticipated, because they were like for 3 months and then it became a couple of years. And that what made them all that feedback, that success that they made. And some of the big media companies are jumping on that bandwagon, like Schibsted or NTG. They're starting their own digital tech media research group or funds to invest into new startups. But the problem, what I have noticed and discussing with similar people, have found that the existing big companies, those who became big in the industrial eras, you have all these big manufacturing giants, they are not moving fast enough. And like you said, all the regulations are there to help them, and then the political part comes in. So, like again, it all comes down to us, that how we push it forward, so that those regulations are not hindrance in getting the new technology. Of course, within a similar, there has to be some safety net, so that it doesn't harm the society in a big way. But it's just like computer virus, that you have like new virus coming in every day or every minute, and then you have the antivirus coming in. So the whole point is that like decentralization, and so one has to be, as an individual citizen, a bit more pushy and responsible, and sort of telling our legislators that we want to change, and same with the big companies. So I guess everything is working for consumers, and how to enhance the consumer consciousness, so that new technology can be readily available to enhance their life. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, so it's like I said before, that we have to take the step, like either get the chip in our body, or put ourselves out there that hey, we are ready to see that we are ready to be the guinea pigs.
One perspective here that often comes up for me is that, okay, this regulation is an obstacle in some sense, but it also is a good thing. I mean, it works. You can do useful stuff with regulation. It's just that it's lagging. It's not adapting to the current rate of development. And next to this topic, I think, because there is more responsibility that is pushed to the individual and the consumer and the voter. I don't necessarily think that's a good development. I think that hinges on a view of the individual that is not very to reality. But I don't know what to. So I would perhaps propose that we move in the direction of having some kind of structures where we make decisions for each other to offload all this responsibility. And how large those structures could be is perhaps smaller than the nation states of years past, but still, and they need to become smarter as well than the existing confidence structures that have existed so far. But this is a core point of contention, I think. That's my point.
Well, there's centralization versus decentralization. Well, that's a bit a double-edged sword, because on the other hand, open source, is it centralized or decentralized? If everyone's using the same open source thing, should that be considered centralized? And if we're all getting water from the same pipes from the same company here in Stockholm, that's centralized. So in some parts of the world, centralization is actually a good thing. We don't want to have like 20 competing water companies in Stockholm. One is enough, right?
I think it depends how it's done. And I thought about that when you talked about the legalized framework.
I didn't quite hear the question.
How decentralized versus decentralized? Do we want 20 water companies in Stockholm?
Yeah.
Maybe. It depends on... I think water would be difficult, but when it comes to electricity, yes, we would want that. We want there to be a framework that says if you run an electronics grid or electricity grid, you need to accept that some consumers will push back, that they will actually produce energy, and so they want to sell that or offload, etc. And that has actually worked well, and I think if it's Arizona in the US where they are...
Gotland.
Okay, Gotland? Alright, so
That's
I only know
one
about a state in the US where they actually forced the electricity companies to accept consumers selling energy to them. We don't have that in Sweden at the moment, so I think the only way to be able to do it is you register a company. So farmers do that. They register a company, put up their own windmill, and then they can sell electricity. But as a consumer, you cannot, which we would want to do. If you have an electric car and there's a shortfall of electricity at night, maybe you actually want to sell the energy that's stored in the car's battery. Maybe you will make money at that instant moment.
But they all have to do it through the same grid.
You all have to do it through the same grid. Do we want 100 internets? I think we're getting there. I think the topic of centralization versus decentralization is whether it's forced or emergent. Although I can absolutely see the point of even emergent central depositories being bad.
I would rather judge it in terms of the consequences. I mean, it's also about like self-governance versus top-down governance, and when the autonomy there, that's a moral aspect. But when dealing with a scenario of like 20 electric companies, or it makes the network as a whole anti-fragile. More stable, and perhaps that's not the case with water companies. And you'll just have to look at each complex system and see, is this best done more decentralized or more centralized, and how can we, like, because centralized works in some cases, planning works, but it's all, it's kind of dependent on what you're talking about, what domain.
Through that, we're seeing shifts inside of capitalism. The capitalism we had in Sweden was a cooperative, quite static type, with big companies such as Volvo, Ericsson, that have changed quite a lot recently. But there is one problem that we're seeing actually, that many of the companies nowadays are owned by, well, our pension funds, and they are changing the nature of capitalism because they want to see return on their investments and are not that aware of what they're investing in. They basically don't care about disruption or don't give a particular value that they cannot see in a very blind way on the balance sheet. So what type of capitalism is better to, well, for transhumanism?
Do you have an English version of Nordbaroner? Do you know them? Do you know one? So the Peter Thiels and the Google founders and etc. Because those are the. So I don't even know what this would be. The Wallenbergs or the Mellons in US. So the people who actually changed the nation or maybe the world because they had a lot of money and an idea. You won't find them in the pension funds. So you're absolutely correct. They don't have a vision, they don't have an idea, they don't have a will of something that they want to do. But we have that in these very rich persons who are not part of the system, I guess I would describe them as. They want to do stuff and push that through with their own money, and they don't really care. They don't want to go broke, but they don't really care whether there's an immediate return or not. And I think that's the capitalism of the future.
But won't the nerd barons attract a lot of incoming fire in public opinion? They are the last visible faces of capitalism. No one attacks Folksam or an anonymous pension fund, but Elon Musk is open for attack. Is it a good thing for transhumanists providing with cover fire?
Interesting thought, explaining why what he's doing is good for humans, society.
Well, it's a difficult question, I know.
On the topic of corporations and decentralization, the topic of crowdfunding, I think, is very interesting in this regard, because you said that 90% or 75 to 90% of all ventures fail. Well, 60% of Kickstarters fail, and 40% succeed and deliver their goods to their consumers within the time, not necessarily within the time span that they set up, but on the other hand, neither do centralized producers of works. So, and there we already have the innovation, the people who want to do interesting things. They're looking directly at people and asking, and they ask, do we want this? Is this of interest? Which means that they don't have to guess as much. If you don't reach your goals, then you won't have to risk anything. You won't get any money at all. And if you're unlucky, you've spent some time on this product, but you've spent less time than you would have if you would have looked for funding at regular centralized production organization or a company of sorts. So I think that crowdfunding will be a very good thing for transhumanism in general, because it pushes forward. It knows what people want, and it dares to dream in a different way, perhaps.
There's a quote from Steve Jobs. You can never ask consumers what they want, because it's not what they know they want. It's not the same thing as they will want when they see it, which is true. However, I do agree with you.
That's not what Kickstarter is doing.
Kickstarter is asking, is this something you want? but it seems to work when it comes to cutting-edge ideas, which have me slightly confused. But I think it's
not asking what do you want and leaving it up to the consumer to say, I want this kind of thing. It's saying, I came up with this wonderful thing. Do you want it? Yeah. And,
so they see.
So that's quite a different.
I think it has to do with actually the selection. It's not your average consumer that visits Kickstarter and backs it. I think we're skewing the reality a bit there, but it doesn't. We don't need to care about it, because if the product gets made, then others will see it, and if it's a success, then others will want it, even those that aren't the usual Kickstarter consumers.
The popularity of Kickstarter has increased exponentially over the years, so it will if it has not yet reached mainstream consumer.
But how much of that expansion of Kickstarter is just begging for causes that will never really succeed, but people are desperate for getting money from somewhere, and then they do it through Kickstarter? How much of the expansion is that?
I didn't catch your question.
Well, for example, the Apple Store used to start out as a Wild West, like everyone rushed in to develop and put their own products there, but now there's so much competition in Apple Store that some of people they can't just compete there anymore, and they look for alternatives, and Kickstarters, Indiegogo and other crowdsourcing platforms like that have become the alternative, and soon they might also get saturated. So how much of the expansion is like...
If I could comment, I think that Kickstarter and Indiegogo, they are in themselves weeding out the bad ideas, because if you go to Kickstarter and see there's a lot of ideas that don't get any cash. And I think the measure we should use for how the value there is just the cash and not the number of ideas, because the number of ideas, there can be 1,000 ideas or 100,000. But what matters is the cash that people actually use this platform to put stuff into.
Most ventures that fail Kickstarter almost get no money at all, between 0 and 10% of the money they need to fund the project. So I don't really see the problem there. People wasting their money, if that's what you're trying to get at.
Not wasting money, but for people who have been weeded out by one platform that has become very popular and oversaturated, are looking for alternatives.
So I think there's something we need to reflect upon, and that is that we always remember the success cases. The average developer in an average app store does not make money. Making apps for a living is as useful as going to a casino for a living. Some will manage and most don't. And I do have the numbers, and they're quite scary. I would expect the same thing for Kickstarter. I would not expect it to be possible to earn a industrial age salary by creating Kickstarter products, except for some few cases, and those are the success stories we like to talk about. And then we're back to where does innovation come from. If you talk to one of the developers behind Minecraft, Jed, he was quite open with the fact that his game development career was funded by CSN, Swedish student loan organization. And that is true for the Swedish game success story, which currently employs 3,000 persons. So we're talking about the old industrial companies, where Ericsson had, 60,000 people employed in Sweden, and the current success story of Swedish gaming has 3,000. Compare those. They're all funded by the Swedish Social Security Network when they do development. Most innovative ideas people do as students, live at home or live on a student loan. And as a society, we probably need to reflect on that. If we want to increase innovation, we need to understand where it comes from. A person like me is in his 40s, working at a company for a normal salary and with a small kid at home. There's very little time left to do innovative projects, even if I have the ability to go on Kickstarter or sell an app in app stores. So,
Which is why you go on paternity leave.
which is why you go on paternity leave, because you think you will have, time to do stuff, but you realize that you've never had as little time, spare time as you currently have.
Yeah, so
We should take that into account when doing national economic calculations on the value, perhaps of what you mentioned before.
Citizen salary, which is coming up for referendum in Switzerland, which I find quite amazing. Of all countries, Switzerland.
And it's such an interesting idea that it's spanning the whole political spectrum. You can find the idea from the left wing of traditional politics to Friedmanite libertarians arguing for a negative income tax. But besides some sort of agreements, no one has ever mentioned it because it's so deeply alien to industrial society.
Because we're saying a new society, and there is no.
Yes,
so it's kind
but
of
it's quite a hurdle.
it's a kind of centralization that actually supports decentralization. It supports the lone innovators, but then the patents is a bad kind of centralization which causes fragmentation. Like the reason why we have so many different video codecs is because of software patents. You want to create a video codec that's good for one purpose, you have to work around so many patents that we have a pile of mostly useless video codecs. So that's a bad kind of centralization that's strangling innovation.
As a researcher, I'm told not to read patents. When I innovate, I'm told not to read patents. Because if I knowingly violate someone else's patent, we're eligible for 3 times the damage. We need to pay 3 times the damage, as if I don't know that I violated someone else's patent. Which is pretty amazing, considering the reason an innovator gets a patent is because his secret shall be spread. This is not talked about a lot, but that's the reason for patents. If I just want to make a product, I can keep my invention secret and make the product. The patent monopoly I am given so that I will tell the rest of the world how I did it. That's why you're supposed to be able to read a patent and then directly create the same product, which needs to be described as a working prototype. That's not what it looks like today in the world, and it's completely useless protecting the innovation for 19 years. 19 years? 19 years back, we didn't have the consumerized internet. Oh, sorry, I have a lot of patents and I don't like them.
Maybe all products should have credit, so you get your name on it.
Yes.
What do you think, what's your opinion about intermediary organizations between business and research? We've spoken about Innova, and that's a government entity, but we have so many organizations here in Sweden, like IVA, the Engineer Academy. You have several boards in order to try to get these ideas through. Would it be fruitful to start to discuss these things with those bodies?
Yes. So I worked. I'm from Skåne, which you might hear when I speak Swedish at least. There's Mobile Heights and others that are funded by the region, and they're supposed to take ideas from the industry that their industry does not make into products and hand them out to universities, and also ideas from the university and hand them out to the industry, and create this collaboration and mix and create startups and help the startups get out and have the connection. It doesn't seem to work all that well. The students at the Yrkeshögskola in Malmö, sort of, not a regular school, but people who have already had a job. Thank you. They are creating a lot more ideas and values and companies, and I think that's because they are funded by the student loan organization in Sweden. Because if you want to make a startup and you start calculating the costs, and I've done this several times, you need to make a lot of money or get a lot in funding to be able to just pay out a salary. It's really, really difficult in Sweden to do that, and I think that is the major issue. So while we can approach those organizations, I think that for our own sake, we need to have answers to the economic part as well, because they're already bursting with ideas. but they're not able to put that into startups.
I was thinking about we have a group of technologies or a group of ideas, and then the general public's view on them are more and more friendly until they can turn into consumer products that people actually want. So that would be described as a movement towards like those technologies. But then certain things can happen that actually moves the public away from them. So I'm thinking of the NSA thing happening, which is sort of still unraveling, which I think what if things can happen that actually move people away from these things, not because of their technical aspects, but because of like how you think of them as secure, for example. So I think before people are actually gonna go all the way, so to speak, with technology implants and so on, this thing will have to be solved. The question is security. Someone will have to solve security. So today people use passwords, which we know are not safe, even though if you have it on a local device, you use the same password as on the website, that's what people do. We know that biometrics are not safe because they can be copied, so someone will have to, much as like public key encryption was like a very important thing to discover, because that made it possible to do certain things that made way for secure payments and so on and so on. So I think something will need to happen in that area. That is something entirely different. In public key encryption may be unsafe too. Suddenly someone discovers an algorithm that can factorize crimes fast enough. So what if someone actually solved security? That isn't password based, you can be forced into, you can't even, sort of like with the money boxes in the grocery shops, they say the people working there can't even get that money. It's no use trying to steal them. That kind of thing. How can we actually solve security? Because I think that needs to happen before people are ready to go all the way, like putting the machines inside. Because the risk of the security breach that people might think more about now with the NSA thing happening, wouldn't want to do before that is solved in a way that is something entirely different than passwords.
What would be the definition of solving it?
Yeah, that's the question. Something that is inherently something
Unbreakable.
different than passwords and anything like it. I don't know.
Unbreakable encryption, basically.
Maybe not even encryption. Maybe something else that we don't know about. That is strange in a sense.
Seth Lloyd has ideas about that.
Sorry, speak up.
Yeah, sorry. Seth Lloyd, the guy who works in the quantum computer, Mike, he has ideas on that. But it's a really ugly point. How can you, because let's face it, how often do you get like wires or something wrong? You have a computer in your brain and get wires.
That would be quite important. No, but
Even more of this connected to the body, then it becomes, there's almost an irony in it that you use the virus metaphor for computer viruses, and in the future you have a computer in your body which can get the virus, which actually affects your body. So it's like a level of abstraction, but that's of course completely can happen.
Yeah, I agree. But quantum computing is going to change that. I mean, I think it's basically like encryption. And I think quantum computing is going to change that area quite a lot. And it might make the pace of development there so quick that people, it's very hard to predict.
But even you still have to let people carry the key somehow. Encryption. I mean, currently we're using passwords, and those can be hacked. And as I said, biometrics are not safe enough as copies. And even if we had some kind of toggle metric scanning the brain, our brains change all the time. So there has to be some way of carrying the key to the encryption with them.
You know,
And I think that
solving the problem. Like there's question here also about like when are we talking about? Are we talking about when we are living as souls in the machine somewhere, or are we talking about like flesh and blood humans that have entrance? The plan said flesh and blood. Yeah. Just carrying the key with you as a number of beings. You can have a physical key, you can have a location in cyberspace, and you know, have memorized location, etc.
Can I make one comment about your parents? Yeah, I'm thinking about the way to not make Elon Musk, for example, such an open target and to just call it nerd parents. It's about getting good ambassadors, like, and really planting it. So it's not just men in science; it's different things. Like, for example, now transhumanism could be associated with Lady Gaga. That's how out there it is. But as soon as we have just to go there, Carola talking about transhumanism, we're somewhere else. It's like getting different people so that everyone can find someone they can identify with. So I think it's like lobbying specific people. I think that's a really key thing for us to do right now. Like searching out who could be good ambassadors and not like finding people who are already known. So that they all, I think that's really key.
Alexander Bard.
I don't think he's a good ambassador because he has already.
He's so identified with others.
Drugs also, yeah.
Well, all transhumanists want to top the pill, I guess.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I think you have a very important point, namely that you need little old ladies interested in. I at least don't want to get Alzheimer's, so that's why I'm a transhumanist, as well as punk rock anti-conformists that want to change their genome. And then you can target various groups. And this night we try to get into the mind of the entrepreneurs of new types of businesses to understand what makes them tick. And I think we've gotten some good points from Troed and some ways to approach either large corporations or startups and start infusing them with some transhumanist ideas while spurring them on to start up new innovative transhumanist technologies. Okay, thank everyone. Nice discussion. Thank you, Troed. And if you want, we can go on.